Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Ichor from Bitewings. Ichor is a two-player abstract strategy game that's part of the most recent series of, they had two games, Iliad and Ichor, both two-player abstract strategy with a Greek theme. But with that said, we're going to dive into Ichor today. Ichor is a two-player abstract strategy game with a Greek theme, because that's part of the series that they have going on over here. In this game, it's going to have slight vibes of Othello to the mix, but with a healthy dose of gods and monsters to mix things up. You see, in the game, we have these tokens. You're going to have, and there's two different sides of the board. There's the 6 side, and this is more of a map than a board, but there's the 6x6 and the 7x7. Over here, we're playing on the 7x7. I'll also say, so that you can more easily see things, I have them down over here. Normally, they'd be standing up on their spaces, but then you wouldn't be able to see much, so I have them down right now so you can see it a little better, but also it kind of goes into the next space, so bear with me as I try to walk through how this plays. In general, the basics of the game before you get into the actual, the character abilities, is that on your turn, you're going to pick a god or monster, depending which side you're on, and you're going to move that god or monster as far as you can in a straight line until it's blocked by an obstruction, either another character, your own or the opponent, or the edge of the board. So for example, we can take this guy over here and we can move them over here. Again, they're going to kind of overlap a little bit, but over here they move there. And then we're going to take one of our tokens and leave it behind on each of the spots, including the spot we vacated, but not on the spot we're on. That's the basic idea. You move your tokens, you move your gods or monsters, you fill the spots with tokens, and what is it you're trying to do? You're trying to get rid of all of your tokens. The first player to get rid of all of the tokens, they are going to win the game. Also, I should note the monsters go first. I had the god go here, but the monsters go first in case you were wondering. So you're going to be moving your characters around, trying to put your tokens on the board, but there's more to it. Let's cover a few of the more before we get into the various abilities. So for example, let's pretend they go over here, they move down here, for example, leaving behind a trail of their own tokens, but then from there, I can move over here. So when I move again across, I'm going to put a token down the spot I vacated, but also I'm going to swap my opponent's token with my own. That's going to be those slight Othello vibes where as you move around the board, you have the opportunity to adjust the board, both adding your own and removing your opponents. So for example, this Minotaur might go down here, leaving a trail of tokens along the way as well. Again, the spot they vacated, but also removing that token as they cross it. That's going to result in tokens slowly being added to the board and the board becoming more and more full as you play, but also having more and more of those fun little moves where you completely destroy what your opponent has, leading to you getting rid of all your tokens. Those are the general basics. The last thing to note is if you do end your spot in a spout with a token, so for example, let's just pretend this character is over here. If they moved down here, then they're going to remove that token in the final spot. So whether you land on your own or an opponent's, you always remove a token from the final spot when you end there. You cannot have two characters in the same spot, and you cannot have two tokens in the same spot, and you cannot have a character and a token in the same spot. This is where the abilities come into play. Every one of the gods and every one of the monsters has an ability. And the base set over here, I believe, has 8 gods and 8 monsters, of which you're using either 6 or 7, depending on the side you're playing with, which means no matter what, you're not able to use all of the gods and monsters, and each god and each monster has their own separate ability card, giving their rule as to what they can do differently. There's also expansions, I should note, that give more gods and monsters, as well as like gates and other things that get added to the game, but more variability baked into it if you have those expansions. This, I should note, is the deluxe version of the game. But with that said, with these gods and monsters, each one has a one-time use ability. The key is that one-time use, because on your turn, you either do a basic movement, as I've shown you so far, or alternatively, you're going to utilize an ability, which usually is going to be some variation of their movement, so it's not that you can't move, it's usually that the ability takes place of the movement. Whether it's jumping over a character, or whether it's Athena over here, who simply moves 1, 2, 3, meaning they can kind of break. Let's find Athena. Athena is over here, so Athena can simply go 1, 2, 3, and then you can go ahead and replace those tokens. Well, replace my own, which was unnecessary, but they were able to move to another spot, breaking that straight line. But the flip side of that is you actually have to flip side. You have to move this to the flip side over here, and this card is now gone. This ability is utilized. Athena is done. My personal favorite in the game is going to be the Cyclops. The Cyclops can be incredibly damaging depending on how they are set up, but the Cyclops over here gets to move as far as they want in a straight line and then curve. So they get to go ahead and do that, and that means they can get a ton of their tokens onto the board, but then the opposing player can go ahead and use Aphrodite to copy that ability. Each player has a card, Medusa and Aphrodite, that allows you to copy an ability, an opposing player's ability. So even though the Cyclops is really cool, assuming you do have Aphrodite in play, it's a fun way to respond to it, which often results in these, I'm starting to move into thoughts and opinions, but it often results in strategic setups as players start to try to find ways to counter each other. If I know that Cyclops is really strong as the monster player, and I know that you're going to try to use Aphrodite to try to counter it, I want to take my Cyclops move when your Aphrodite Aphrodite is blocked or in some way just can't take the ability to the same level of strength. There's going to be lots of back and forth as players start to learn the various abilities on the board, their own and their opponents, and start to set themselves up to specifically react both offensively in terms of how you can actually make sure you're winning, but defensively in order to make sure your opponent doesn't sweep your legs out from under you. You also have player aids, by the way, for both of these both players. So as the god player, I'm looking at all of their abilities on these cards, so at any given point you do have access to seeing everything, even if you aren't reading across the table. The cards do have small iconography on them. The tiles have small iconography on them. They are helpful as a reminder. They are not helpful for understanding for your very first game, but once you actually know what these characters do, it is a good quick reminder of the abilities. But that's the basic idea. First person to go ahead and get all the tokens on the board wins the game, sort of, because you do play this in rounds of 2. You're going to measure the difference between your opponent's pieces and your own when you win, meaning this is a game. As much as usually when you play a game, when you're going to win, just win nicely and you don't need to get the highest, best victory. In this game, you kind of do, because you're going to then switch sides. Your opponent's going to have the opportunity to do everything you just did to them, and whoever has the higher score disparity, meaning if one player both wins both games, that's it, it's over. But even if one player wins one and the other player wins the other, you are going to look at how badly they won or how well they won and compare that to each other to see your final score in this game. And that is how you play Ichor, which brings us to the review of what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like. In general, this is an abstract strategy game, which I like to begin with, but it gives you asymmetric powers and tons of abilities, which I also like. So overall, this game is giving you that clean, abstract feel as to how can I get one over on my opponent as I navigate the board, but it's doing so while giving you a whole ton of abilities and powers, and also the variety of abilities, the fact that you won't use all of them every single game. And again, if you have those expansions, even better, because, you know, if you have a bunch of characters and you're only using like half or plus or a little more than half of them every time you play, that gives you a lot of flexibility and variability to the type of gaming experience. The combinations of powers are going to lend themselves differently to how that game feels and how that game plays out. I appreciate the 2-round cycle as well. The fact that when you do have that unfair setup, because you could have a game where one player has their Aphrodite or Medusa and the other player doesn't, and that copying ability is like a good kind of catch-all to like, I know you have this powerful ability, but I can copy it, so that's a fun little thing to have. But if you have Cyclops and Medusa and I don't have Aphrodite, that can feel unfair. And that 2-round cycle kind of removes that disparity, because it is an asymmetric game, and so obviously anything can play out differently, but at the end of the day, that does feel like a greater sense of agency because we swap sides and then measure scores. And the game is short enough that it's not that like hard of an experience to do. I'd say individual game sessions generally come in on the low end in like the 10-minute range, because you can have sudden victories and defeats as players just manage to get their tokens out. But I'd say a typical game is probably in that 20-25 minute range, meaning a single session is 20-25 minutes, and then you swap sides and repeat and do it back and forth. And you can have more drawn-out games. As you get better at this game, and speaking of which, something I like about the game is you do get better at this game. This is definitely one of those games, and I guess I generally encourage this, but this is for sure one of those games that I think your first play or two is going to be wildly different than your third or fourth play, because your first play, you kind of just start moving around the board, placing out tokens, and then that end game really creeps up on you. And I do find subsequent games get so much more defensive, now that you actually know what your cards do, now that you know your opponent's doing, now that you've seen how it can all play out. It ends up getting significantly more defensive as you stop focusing purely on what you can do, but you also start focusing on how your opponent's about to be set up for a strong move. And so this is a game that gets better with plays as you go through it. I mean, many games do, but this one very much, I would say the speed at which this accelerates to a much better experience is vastly different on your second game even compared to your first, and will only get higher as you learn the characters and as you really start playing defensively, as well as just focusing on that one opportunity that happened to show up. As far as things I don't like in the game, going off that point, I do find this is not a game that's as fun against a new player when you're already the person who knows the game. That does happen in the game where I've played it 3 or 4 times, I teach someone new, and they don't really understand what's happening, so you really have to kind of pull it back if you're someone diving into it with a new player. I do find that, again, by the time you get to the second game, that gap is already closed decently, but that first game, knowing how this plays out and having a sense of the characters is going to give you a very strong edge over somebody who's just diving into it for the first time. So that gap kind of means teaching somebody new is a training session and not a full game experience, what I would particularly want from it. I'll say that the mat, and this is a bigger complaint for me, the mat is very annoying over here, because you have these mats and you have these standees, and there's lots of falls, which results in characters always feeling off balance or even just straight up falling over. Like, the combination of components over here definitely made this so that I do wish, like, I don't know if I wish for miniatures or stronger bases or just a board. I think honestly I wish for a board, because even when you place this mat down on a fully flat surface, the mat itself itself has folds. These characters are flimsy and prone to falling over fairly easily. It inevitably happens throughout the game. I do find the components, like despite the fact that the components are otherwise pretty nice, that matte aspect just didn't work well for very tall standees that have a low center of gravity, or they have poor balance on the folds of the mat. It sounds like a small complaint, but it is a component complaint that definitely does impact the game experience. I'll say as well, speaking of component complaints that impact the game experience, the token swapping can sometimes be annoying. Sometimes you have these whole rows of tokens you're trying to swap out, and the process is you pick up every single token, you move it off, and then you put down your own tokens, which in and of itself is not the biggest deal. Where it becomes more of a bigger deal is sometimes you don't remember where you started, and you're like, I think I did that one, I pulled that one off. Other times you're using abilities. You're using the Cyclops for a whole row and column, and it's not just tedious, but sometimes you can be like, I'm pretty sure I got that token, and I'm not 100% certain. I do almost wish it was more Othello-like in that you just flipped tokens. That would be faster and easier, but then again, it might change the way the whole math of the thing plays out. But the token swapping is not as annoying as the mat, but it's definitely something small that got in the way of the experience. And then similar to, I guess, the pro of how the game accelerates nicely for you, I did find that my first game almost felt like a write-off, because my first game was like, I understand the mechanics of the experience, but there's like, 14. There's 14 powers and abilities that I have to know what's going on, and that initial mental load is a lot. So I kind of dove into my first game being like, I'm just gonna do things and see how this plays out. And honestly, my first game, I think I used like 2 of my abilities. I was focusing purely on the mechanics of it and not focusing on the abilities as much. As you play it more, that will definitely change, but your initial game does have a degree of mental overload because of just 14 abilities that are being thrown at you for something you've never played before. As far as I can see others not liking, the game can definitely end too quickly if you're not careful. Again, speaking of my first game, that's one of those things where it's just like, I'm going, you're going, I'm going, boom, you won. Oh, that was a 10-minute experience in which I barely used my abilities, and you just managed to get that win in. That kind of thing does happen, especially, I would say it happens more as you're starting off with the game, but even as you get better, it is easy for that end game to sneak up on you, and additionally, it can feel anticlimactic. The game is very much a tough back and forth as you get better at it, but even as you get better at it, eventually someone just sneaks in the victory, and I do find that is a semi-anticlimactic experience as far as the way it feels. It doesn't feel like you're like, I finally won. It's almost because of the way you're adding tokens back and forth. There's usually a point where you're like, and I got my tokens, and you're like, oh, good game, good game, good game. Like, it is a good game, but it has a slightly anticlimactic feel at the very end of it. As far as final thoughts on Ichor, overall, this is a good game. It is held back by some component aspects, and then just that kind of pace of getting onboarded and getting to the experience. But I do find that once you are playing this, and once you do know it, again, component issues aside, it is a very satisfying back and forth, especially as you find that arc of moving from opportunistically finding opportunities to finding those opportunities where you get to score a good turn is very satisfying, but it's more satisfying as you evolve to playing defensively while being mindful of the offensive moves. Knowing that you can get those good moves in, but you're doing so while not opening up your opponent, that level of escalating play does feel very nice as you go through it. Overall, it's a 3.5 out of 5, a good game, some issues, some component limitations, but overall a pretty solid experience. As far as other game recommendations, if you like that kind of Othello, but in a more board game experience, a more designer game experience, definitely check out Yinch, which has been around for quite some time, but gives you that Othello gameplay with a lot more game built into the experience. And then if you're looking for abstract strategy games with a Greek theme and asymmetric player powers, check out Santorini as well. It gives you far less player powers per game, 1 for each player, but it gives you a ton of player powers so that you can constantly evolve and develop as you play through the game. In any case, then until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.